I never thought I'd admit this, not even to myself. But some evenings, when the house is still and the world feels far away, I forget that I'm supposed to be just his mom. My name is Vanessa. I'm 41, a department lead at a growing digital agency, and the kind of woman people assume has life all sorted. I wear clean lines and quiet authority. I speak in meetings without hesitation, and I'm the one others come to for clarity. What they don't see is the silence that waits for me when I walk through my front door, the kind of silence that only gets filled by my son, Noah. Noah isn't my biological child, but he's been mine in every way that matters since he was 3. I brought him home after years of red tape and sleepless worry, after he'd been through too many temporary homes. The day he reached for my hand on his own, the first time he drifted off to sleep leaning against my side, those are the moments that live deep in my memory. They're the reason I kept going. I raised him alone. The relationships I tried never stuck. Most of the men I met wanted their own children, wanted the whole picture-perfect fantasy. And I couldn't give them that. After a long, lonely struggle with infertility, I stopped trying to explain why I didn't just try harder. Noah never asked for anything I couldn't give. He filled the empty spaces left by others with quiet warmth and late-night laughter. He turned my house into something living. I watched him grow up in the spaces we made, sprawled on the living room floor with science projects, curled up under the blanket we shared for movie nights, humming while he did the dishes. He turned 18 just last week. He's legally an adult now. We threw a party, just a few friends, nothing big. I made his favorite cake, dark chocolate, caramel with a hint of sea salt. He hugged me afterward, thanked me in that new, deeper voice that still catches me off guard. That night, I lay awake, not because I was worried he was out, but he had texted me. No, it was something else. He wasn't mine in the same way anymore. Something had shifted. He was moving into the world, making his own gravity. I felt myself orbiting outside of it. A few days later, I saw him standing on the front steps with someone new, a girl, laughing, blonde, maybe 17, freckles on her nose, and the kind of presence that fills a quiet street. She leaned into him. Her hand touched his arm like it belonged there. I watched through the window, my coffee cooling in my palm. I told myself not to read into it, but I did. That night, he texted again. Out with Maddie. Don't wait up. I waited anyway. I don't know when the ache started. Maybe it had always been there, growing beneath the surface of motherhood. A feeling I can't quite name. It's not about desire or envy. It's not like that. I don't long for stolen glances or midnight talks under stars. I miss him. I miss the version of him that was entirely mine. The boy who'd sneak chocolate into the grocery cart when he thought I wasn't looking. Who'd rest his head in my lap, still drowsy from a long day. These days, he smells like someone else's perfume. His voice holds stories I'm not part of. And it hurts more than I expected. I keep telling myself it's normal. That this is what being a parent means. That this kind of love is always meant to step back. But no one tells you how hard it is to fade. Last night, I was curled up on the couch, pretending to read, the TV murmuring in the background. The door opened. You're still up? Noah asked. Couldn't sleep, I answered, keeping my voice light.
He sat beside me. Close.
So close. And for a second, I could believe we were still back in the easy days. He smelled like rain and something floral. I didn't ask. He looked at me, searching. You okay? I wanted to say I was fine, that I was proud, that I wanted him to be happy. But all I said was, I miss you. His brow creased and he reached for my hand. I'm right here. Only he wasn't. Not the way he used to be. And maybe that's what makes it hurt. That moment stuck with me. It was so simple, just a hand, a few words, but it cracked something open in me. I lay in bed until morning, watching shadows shift on the ceiling. Every second since, I've felt the distance growing, like a thread pulling tighter between us. And I don't know how to let it go. I said nothing the next day. Just made his favorite breakfast, eggs with sharp cheddar, toast with cinnamon sugar, his coffee with 2 sugars, and a splash of cream. He ate with his phone beside him, texting between bites. Maddie? I asked, keeping my tone light. He nodded.
Yeah.
We're hitting the park. She wants to try paddle boating. Sounds cute. It will be. He paused, then glanced up. You should come with us sometime. I laughed. I'd just be the awkward tag-along. He shook his head. Not to me. I wasn't prepared for how much it would sting. His kindness. The quiet way he saw through me before I even acknowledged the unraveling inside myself. I nodded, murmured something about needing to work, and disappeared into my home office. It was the only place I still felt in control, surrounded by plans, data, polished presentations. But today, even formulas and figures couldn't drown out the weight in my chest. I kept checking the time, told myself I was just managing my day. But I was waiting. I knew I was. He came back after dark, his cheeks sun-kissed, damp strands of hair sticking to his forehead. He smelled like water and late summer wind. And her. She followed him in this time. It was the first time she'd come inside. She was sweet, disarmingly polite, calling me Miss Carter and complimenting the lilies by the stairs. I offered them something to drink. She declined. Jonah accepted, but the smile he flashed her afterward wasn't one I'd seen in a long time. I'm gonna go get changed, he said casually, heading upstairs. And that left the two of us. Her name was Maddie. In any other life, I might have liked her. Thoughtful, sincere, her intelligence effortless and easy. But in this reality, she was unknowingly dismantling something sacred to me. Bit by bit. And she didn't even realize it. He brings you up all the time, she said, fidgeting with a bracelet on her wrist. Says you're kind of his anchor. I smiled, small, brittle. That's kind of him. No, really. He said you raised him on your own. That you gave up everything for him. My throat felt tight. He gave me more than I ever lost. She smiled, her eyes soft. And I wanted to hate her for being so genuine. Jonah came back wearing a hoodie and loose sweats. Ready? She nodded, then looked at me one last time. It was great meeting you. I hope we can hang out soon. I wanted to say, that's not going to happen. Instead, I said, I'd like that. The door clicked shut, and the silence that followed felt heavier than it ever had before. Later that night, I found myself flipping through a photo album I hadn't touched in years. His early years, birthday hats too big for his head, cheeks smudged with frosting, tiny fingers gripping mine in every shot.
He was mine then. Fully. Joyfully.
That kind of belonging felt impossibly distant now. A few days later, I stood outside his door, my hand hovering just above the frame. I could hear faint music playing, something low and pulsing, almost meditative. I knocked. Yeah, came his voice. I opened the door slowly. He was at his desk, mid-scroll, surprised to see me. Hey, I said. Just checking in. We haven't really connected much lately. He gave a soft, lopsided grin. Yeah, I guess I've been caught up. I noticed. The pause that followed wasn't awkward, but it brimmed with words we hadn't found yet. He got up and stepped toward me. Mom. I know, I whispered, my voice catching. I know you're growing up. I just miss when you didn't have to. He pulled me into a hug. No hesitation. Just arms around me, solid and grounding. I clung a little longer than I should have. But he didn't let go. I miss you too, he whispered against my shoulder. I looked up at him, his features more adult than I wanted to admit, and yet still carrying traces of the boy I'd raised. I knew I needed to start letting him go.
Just not yet.
Then something shifted. The house fell into silence as the lights dimmed, then blinked out completely. A faint mechanical sigh from the hallway. The power had gone. Jonah chuckled quietly, but his breath was close against my skin. That's weird timing. I tried to laugh. I guess we forgot to feed the meter. I joked, though it barely registered above a murmur. Still, neither of us moved. I knew I should step back. The hug had stretched into something more than comfort. But he was warm and familiar, and the dark felt like permission to stay in this quiet. He adjusted slightly, resting his chin on my shoulder like he had when he was small. It's peaceful, he said. I like it. Without thinking, I like it. Without thinking, I lifted my hand and softly brushed my fingers through his hair. It was instinct, almost something I used to do to calm him after nightmares. But now it stirred something unfamiliar. He exhaled slowly, like I had released something that had been stuck inside him for days. Can we sit for a bit? He asked gently. We moved toward the bed and sat side by side, legs brushing. I couldn't see his face, but I felt his nearness. The room was quiet. Breath, heartbeat, memory, those were the only things moving. And then he said, barely above a whisper, "You smell like Maddie." My breath caught. I'd bought the perfume days earlier. Not to replace her. Not really. I told myself it was nothing, just a way to feel connected to the pieces of him I was losing. But hearing him say it out loud, I realized I'd crossed a line. Not one you could point to in a photo or recall in a story, but one that lived somewhere deeper. Somewhere you don't talk about. I turned my face toward his, and in the dark, I kissed him on the cheek. It was instinctive but deliberate, too close to the corner of his mouth, too long to be motherly. He froze. I felt it in the tension of his spine, in the silence that fell between us like a stone. Then, slowly, as if he couldn't help himself, he leaned in and pressed his lips to mine. It was a brief, trembling kiss. No urgency. Just confusion. And longing. And something deeper that neither of us wanted to name. When we pulled apart, the silence roared. I could hear the rain begin to tap gently against the glass, a quiet rhythm that filled the space neither of us seemed willing to breach. He started, then stopped. I'm sorry. My lips parted, the words caught behind a swell of emotion. Don't be, I whispered. But I wasn't sure what I meant by that. Not really. Because the truth was, I didn't know who I was outside of him. I didn't want to be a chapter he closed, a figure in the background while his life moved forward without me. I had raised this boy. I had built my identity around protecting him, nurturing him, being his home. Somewhere along the way, I'd blurred the edges of where he ended and I began. And maybe, just maybe, I didn't know how to unblur them. After that night, something shifted. We didn't talk about it, not directly. But the space between us was no longer simple. The next morning, Jonah was already awake, a rare reversal of roles. I found him in the kitchen, stirring sugar into my favorite mug like he'd done it 100 times before. He looked up, his expression unreadable. Not ashamed, not guilty, but quiet, watchful. Morning, he said, his voice calm. Morning, I answered, stepping in carefully. The silence between us was intense. It was thoughtful. And in that space, I realized this wasn't about boundaries crossed. It was about unspoken fears, tangled emotions, and the grief of letting someone grow beyond needing you in the same way. We didn't talk about what had passed between us. Not the glance. Not the moment. Not the shifting gravity. But it lingered, in the hesitations, the half-smiles, the silence that wrapped around us like a warm but uncertain fog. Jonah's phone buzzed less often, and when it did, he rarely checked it. The excuses came one after another. She was busy, he was tired, their schedules didn't line up. But I could see the change in his shoulders when he spoke about her, the way the spark had dulled. I didn't press. One evening, I found him curled up in his usual corner of the couch, a blanket thrown over his legs, the glow of the television painting soft light across his face. I sat down next to him, and without a word, he leaned against me, like he had when he was small, when the world felt too loud, and my lap was the only silence he needed. We didn't speak for a long time. She's kind, he said eventually, barely louder than the hum of the screen. She is, I replied, but it doesn't feel right anymore. I didn't respond, not with words, just stayed still, offering space. He didn't need my approval. He needed permission to step into uncertainty, to let go of something that no longer felt like home, and maybe to grieve what he was still learning to outgrow. A few days later, I heard Maddie's voice at the door. I paused at the hall, watching Jonah step outside to meet her. Their conversation was hushed, their silhouettes soft in the porch light. There was no shouting, no tears, just quiet distance. When he came back inside, he looked at me with eyes that seemed both older and sadder. I didn't ask what happened. I only said, "Do you want to help with dinner?" He nodded. That night, it was quiet, but not empty. The silence between us wasn't a wall. It was a room, one we were both learning to exist in. And as we passed plates and rinsed glasses, I realized what we were building wasn't a replacement for love lost. It was something else. Something about finding steadiness in a world that constantly moved. About reorienting ourselves after everything had shifted. We'd always been a family of two, and that hadn't changed. But now, we were learning how to be that without losing who we were as individuals.
He didn't kiss me.
He only took my hand and pressed it gently, warm, thoughtful, grateful. A simple gesture, but it lingered. And I understood, as clearly as I ever had, that Maddie was no longer in his world the way she had been. Not because of anger or selfishness, but because Jonah and I had been orbiting the same space for so long, gravity had made it impossible to avoid. This shift between us hadn't happened overnight. It unfolded like early spring, quiet, persistent, impossible to ignore. The way he began moving through the house, the way his gaze softened when he looked at me, like I was the anchor he hadn't realized he still needed. His compliments changed too. "You look strong today," he'd say. Or, "That color suits you," in a tone that wasn't embarrassed or flippant but grounded. Intentional. It wasn't flirtation. It was connection. A deep need to be seen and to offer something in return. It unnerved me sometimes. Made me wonder how much of my identity had been built on being his everything and how much of his had been shaped by wanting to stay mine. At first, I laughed them off. Habits of a mother not ready to admit how good it felt to be seen by him in this new light. But the way his eyes lingered on mine, the way his hand would rest lightly on my back as he passed me in the hallway, spoke more than the words ever could. I stood for a moment at the top of the stairs, my hand resting on the banister, studying something inside me I hadn't realized was unsteady. That single word, Mom, echoed differently tonight. Not smaller, not less, but layered. Weighted with something unspoken. I made my way down slowly, the wood cool beneath my bare feet, each step stretching between the woman I'd been when he was small and the woman I was now, with a grown man waiting at the bottom of the stairs. When I reached the door, I hesitated for just a second before stepping outside. And then I saw it. The backyard shimmered with quiet magic. Lights like tiny stars were strung across the trees and the fence. The old picnic blanket had been laid out on the grass, flanked by cushions and candles flickering in jars. 2 plates waited, steam curling gently into the night air. I didn't speak. I couldn't. The lump in my throat swelled before any words could make it past. Leo turned and smiled, something proud, something bashful. His eyes sparkled like they had when he was little and showed me a drawing he'd worked on for hours. But this wasn't a boy showing off a crayon masterpiece. This was a man offering something bigger. "You did all this?" I asked, my voice quieter than I'd expected. He nodded. "For you." The words settled gently between us. "For everything," he added. And in that moment, I felt something shift. Not vanish. Not break. Just shift, like tectonic plates beneath a familiar landscape, moving us into a new season neither of us had prepared for, but maybe we're finally ready to meet. We sat and ate slowly, pasta, garlic bread, a small fruit tart for dessert. He'd made it all himself. I couldn't stop smiling. After we ate, he turned toward me, his expression shifting from playful to serious. "I've been thinking a lot," he said, fingers toying with a corner of the blanket. "About everything." I stayed quiet, letting him speak. "You chose me," he said, "when no one else did. You gave me everything. A home, a life, love. You deserved it," I whispered. He shook his head gently. "I didn't even know how to accept it back then. But now I do. And I want to give it back to you. In every way I can." He looked at me then fully. No hesitation. No confusion. Just truth. I love you, he said. Not just because you raised me. Not just because you're kind or strong or the only person who ever stayed. I love you because you're you. Because you see me. Because when I'm with you, nothing else feels missing. My breath caught. The world around us blurred. Only his voice, his eyes, the stars above. He reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away. But I didn't. I let him cup my face, let his thumb trace the edge of my cheek, let the gravity between us pull me into a place I hadn't dared admit I wanted. And then he held me. No words. No rush. Just the kind of embrace that felt like it could hold back every storm, every fear, every lonely night I'd ever known. His arms around me were strong, sure. Not the arms of a boy, but a man who had made a choice. Who had returned the one I'd made all those years ago. I closed my eyes and let myself lean into him, into the warmth, into the truth. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to begin.